Okay, how many of you folks are database folks? There's a couple of kind of people wincing like that. It just can't be that bad. If you're not a database person, you may not understand this picture on the right. 120 years ago, there was a gold rush in the Klondike area of Canada and Alaska. And before they would let you go explore, you had to take a ton of materials from the base camp there up to that ledge, multiple trips before you drop it off. Database DBAs feel like this is their daily existence. Those of you who kind of winched over here. About me, I am a technology evangelist at Percona Corporation. We're database experts. For a dozen years, I was the community manager for MySQL in North America. I wrote a book on using JSON with MySQL. And I'm going to trim the title is to managing, growing, and scaling open source databases. The at SaaS scale is kind of hard to do. Well, for you folks who aren't DBAs or DBA-like experience, the first thing I want to talk about is security. This is the big paranoid area for all DBAs. The first thing is access to your data. If you've never been around someone who's been hacked and lost their data, you don't know how traumatic it is. But the big problems that I see that a lot of folks are doing is that they have a root account on their MySQL or their Postgres database, and they use that account for everything. That's like giving your 12-year-old kid liquors and car keys and telling them to go have a good weekend. It doesn't work. MySQL added roles about 2 years ago. Postgres has had roles for a long time. Use roles. You define what a person does, what they have access to, and as their job description. In the past, what would happen is you'd hire a new accounting clerk, and the only person you knew in accounting, if you were a DBA, was the head accountant, so you'd copy all their permissions to this new person, and you usually gave that new person something that was very dangerous and ended up deleting all the accounting information, which means you had to go back and restore everything and then fix it all. Use good passwords. With MySQL, you can go out and have a whitelist of passwords that you don't use. PASSWORD is not a good password. Let me in is not a good password. The boss is a jerk is not a good password. Go through and get rid of the obvious ones that are out there. Set up reuse roles so that they can't use the same password over and over and over again. Everyone's worked at a company where one person has one password and they use an alternative and then go back to the original one. Don't do that, bad practice. Other thing for DBAs is be stingy with privileges. If a person doesn't need access to something, don't give it to them. If they are dangerous, don't give them delete. There's other things like that. Do not let them have the tools that are going to let them shoot themselves in their foot. Privacy. Most of you who work for big corporations probably don't know that your corporation has some sort of privacy law that they purport to use to the public and to their board of directors. What's real funny is most developers are told you have to produce new code today. We need this launched by next Friday. Next quarter, we need this to do this feature and all that. And they don't really pay attention to their own regulations, laws, and rules on data protection. How many of you have found out that one of your friends works at a company where some junior developer went and copied the production database to a container, put it on a laptop, and lost the laptop? That happens, unfortunately. Encryption. MySQL 8.0, when it came out 4 years ago, by default, enabled SSL and TLS. If you didn't have your certificates, it would create them for you. Great. Good first step. The communications between the server and the client were encrypted. That kept the lazy and the low-end predators of your data away from your data. The next step now is, do you have at-rest encryption on your data? So if something happened and somehow someone managed to steal a disk or a backup of a disk, could they unencrypt your data? And the next thing you're seeing now is active encryption. While the data is actually being used, is it kept encrypted? Now, as DBAs, you're used to having the key to the kingdom to be able to see anything in a database. When I was in college, I was working for the university I was attending, And one of my professors got very upset that I could see his payroll data. Didn't have time, didn't have the need, kind of knew he wasn't getting paid too well, but he was very upset when he found out that technically I could go look at his data. Now with active encryption, you can actually keep the DBAs out of the data if you need to. Stability, and this is also part of security. You want your database to be as stable as possible. You want people to think of it as kind of like the plumbing in your building, if you have good plumbing in your building. You don't want them to think about it unless there's a problem. Hope there'll be no problem. A lot of companies run short on people managing their databases. They don't have someone who watches the new queries come through that don't perform well. There's not someone checking on the backup. Will it AWS handle that? Will it Azure handle that? Upgrades are coming. We'll just let Google worry about that. Also, bandwidth. Now, do you have enough ability to get to your data when you need it? I see a lot of companies going cheap on their AWS accounts, and as things start getting more and more active, and they know they should upgrade, they kind of hold off for a quarter to make sure the boss doesn't get too big of a paycheck. Another thing, if you're, especially in the Postgres world, if you're trying to run a connection pooler, a load balancer, and keep everything high availability, make sure your tools work together. There are some options that, if you install them, will actually fight each other. So make sure that you make sure they connect properly. I'm trying to remember the name of the one tool. I want to call it PG Balance, so that's not the name. It will actually do some connection pooling for you, add in a load balancing, but it doesn't work effectively itself as a connection pooler. Okay, outages. This is something where you have to talk to your bosses and your bosses' bosses and your own folks. What happens if suddenly Jeff Bezos decides to take everything that Amazon does and move it into some other line of work? How long would it take you to move everything over to another provider? Could you take it over to another provider? Are you stuck there? Know how long you can be down. It's scary, but you have to sit down with your boss and say, okay, something catastrophic happens, and we're going to be down for a week. What do we do? A friend of mine does consulting for businesses, and one of her things is she'll go into a business and she'll get to the board and the chief executives together and say, he's missing, he's got a broken arm, we don't know where he is. Who can write hand checks for payroll? Sounds kind of weird, but her business is based in Los Angeles, California, where they have a lot of earthquakes. And she came to notoriety after a big earthquake, and there were many businesses that did not know how to write hand checks. They didn't even know who was on their checking account. Figure out how quickly you can get back from losing your main database. Practice it. Set a time and get there. Also, if your main database is off, do you have a way to scrape data from ongoing operations until you can feed it back to the main data? Okay. The other big thing here with outages is time is money. So when you're down, you are down, you're not bringing in income. Another thing in security is backups. A lot of folks hate this because backups take time, they're messy, you have to know how to work with them. And the easy way, especially in the MySQL world, is to use replication to back up from your primary server to replicas, multiple replicas. Do your main backups off one of those replica. Data retention. How many people here work in the medical industry and know that you have 25, in some cases you have 25 to 50 years to keep your data, to keep the government happy? A friend of mine's working in a company where they have medical data going back 150 years. And it's kind of interesting because they're planning to have to keep the data for another 150 years. What sort of SSD do you think we're going to have in 150 years? If you're doing restorations, you have to be able to know how to do the entire database, just a couple tables, or just a row. And you have to practice this, because if you don't practice this you forget and something goes wrong. Operations. Now, the company I work for, Percona, has an open source tool called Percona Monitoring Management. It's a dashboard that will let you see what your databases are doing. Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, MariaDB, proxy server. And the idea is that you have a glass that you can go to and see what the trends are. If you don't have something like that active, it's kind of hard these days to know when things are going bad. We have so many things demanding our attention that it's nice to be able to go to one screen and see what the health is of your various machines. Also, it's nice to have something that can give you alerts. Hey, your main disk drive is 85% full. What's going on there? Query tuning. Query tuning is not a Harry Potter dark art. It's engineering. A lot of folks have been kind of told that it is kind of a mysterious process. That comes from the Oracle days, where the old DBAs would find out what the optimum way was to run a query and lock that down. MySQL wants to re-optimize a query every time it sees it, same as Postgres. The idea is as your data uses change and as the size of your data changed, what was optimum 6 months ago is not optimum now. So you have to go back every so often and double check. Also, I do not recommend using ORMs. Developers love ORMs. Why? Because they'll do anything to not write a SQL. And it's so much easier for them to learn how to write good SQL. And unfortunately, ORMs are optimized for developers. They're not optimized for running a database. So I like to say, when they get ready to take the training wheels off, the ORM, run it with straight SQL if you can. Schema change management. In the old days, when I just got started, you would write your code out on a piece of paper and then take it to a key punch or a key punch operator and get it prepared. Your data, similarly, if there was a change to the schema, someone wrote it out by hand, checked it all out, and then committed it to the machine. These days, it's fairly easy to do schema management, especially with MySQL, with the instant add columns and the change column stuff. However, they're still not instantaneous enough. So when you make a change, like you add 5 more columns, and you have a petabyte or so of data, it takes a while for everything to get copied over and updated. I've worked around customers that have the need to change their schema every 2 days, which is crazy. And they wonder why they can't keep operations staff. So if you can find a way to bulk change schema changes on an infrequent basis, please do it. I already mentioned backups. How many of you have tossed over the fence projects? Someone's gone out and got their cousin's uncle to go ahead and code something for you, and their nephew put it on a Linux box, and suddenly they give it to you folks in IT and say, okay, our department depends on this. It's not written well, it doesn't work well, but we want to take it from our group of 50 to everyone in the corporation, and you've got to manage it. Those things are always time and money sinks, so be very careful. Set standards. Staff. It always helps to have someone who has some database smarts on staff. A company near me moved everything to the cloud, was very unhappy with their service on one cloud provider, went to another cloud provider and realized they were doing better on-prem, went to go back and hire their old engineering staff, and were very surprised that none of them wanted to come back to work for them. You also lose a lot of institutional knowledge. How am I doing on time? Good on time? Okay. Costs. This is something that developers and DBA folks don't really take enough look at. Financial budget. In the old days, if you wanted to add a hard drive, you had to go through a financial budgeting process, get the board of directors to sign off on it, get the disk drive, which would take weeks, months to arrive, and then you had to install it. These days, you need more, just get a credit card. Now, the great thing about doing things in the cloud, especially with DBAS, is you don't have to worry about that operating budget process anymore, but has the cost of that outscale what you're planning to do. Hopefully you can go back to your company's plans for the last 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, and see where they're planning to be and see where your costs are running. Opportunity cost. Are you locked into one vendor? Now, the idea with the cloud was ideally you'd be able to take it from cloud vendor A to cloud vendor M, and it wouldn't be much more than just moving a backup over. It doesn't work that way. One of the problems in the database world is the Oracle model. Anyone here run an Oracle database in their shop? Oh, I'm glad to see that. It's got two guys kind of, didn't mean to point you out. The old joke was that Oracle doesn't have customers, Oracle has hostages. What would happen is you'd sign up for Oracle version X, and it would run good, and then version X plus 1 would come out, and you find out it would cost you 20% more to run it, and it had a couple good features. And by the way, if you didn't upgrade this year, the version you're running is only 17% more expensive next year. So you figure, well, it's only 3% different. And you figure, well, after about 3 or 4 years of that, you go, screw this, I'm going to move everything to Postgres. And then you find out that Postgres doesn't have all the features you need. So you're basically locked in, half on Postgres, half on Oracle, and Oracle comes out with version X plus 2. That's only 40% more. Yeah. Excuse me. Very hard to make sure that you don't get locked in. Now, the funny thing with everyone going to the cloud is you're now seeing people saying, hey, wait a minute, you know, when we had our own stuff, it was only X amount of dollars, and now the cloud is much more than that. So you're going to see the folks trending away from the cloud. Staff, as I mentioned an hour ago, it's always been hard to find a good DBA. So if you have a good DBA, try to keep them around. Also, a lot of companies that tend to flush a lot of employees through the system have no institutional memory. Why is this operation code called number 54? Why is this column in the database named Joe's digit? There's reasons for this stuff, and it's never usually documented. And the last thing, last big bullet point there, sanity. If you've never worked at a shop where you think that it's Alice in Wonderland, because everything's just going crazy all at once, and you have these reasons and rules that were written 20 years before, or this thing only works on Tuesday afternoons, and you do have to watch your own sanity. Many years ago, I was working at a shop where they decided that they were going to split the company in half. One half was going to be with a company called L3, one half was going to be a company called Raytheon, and everything was going to be divvied up. Well, the only trouble was we had the equipment, we had the engineers, that was great. The only trouble is everyone wanted the same equipment and the same engineers. So there's a thing where we could not satisfy anybody. Okay, open source databases last year became more popular than the proprietary databases. So the good news is Postgres and MySQL and Mongo are climbing up there, although Mongo is kind of proprietary now. So they're becoming popular. They're the base to put your projects on in the future. Now, trouble is if you're on a SQL Server or Oracle or DB2 and you're looking at moving over, we may not have the function that you want. Postgres just got the merge operator. So things are changing, but please look at that. Also be careful if you settle on something like Mongo or MaxDB or Elasticsearch and they change their license. You might suddenly wake up and find out that you owe them more money than you had planned on. So watch out for that. Also, when I was working for Oracle MySQL, I would get a call a week. Hey, I'm running Aurora, and I'm wondering when it's going to get the JSON table function. Well, the AWS engineers don't talk to our engineers. We have no idea where they're doing it. They have access to the source code. And it actually took them 18 months to get that function into their version of MySQL. I don't think they still have it into their Aurora. Also, make sure that if they're running their own version, that they take care of CVEs. if there's a vulnerability out in the base product, it's like they're based off MySQL, and they're not telling you they've made the change to cover that CVE, you might be vulnerable. Last tips, don't assume. First thing I tell every DBA when they start a new job, benchmark. Find out what your 10 most popular queries are and benchmark them. So when they come back 6 weeks later and say it's running slow, you can tell them whether it's running slow or not. Document. It is so amazing to me how many corporate secrets are kept on the back of a Post-it note on the back of a monitor or a keyboard. Document. Know your service level agreements. There's nothing like having a piece of equipment go down and find out that purchasing is arguing with the vendor and your service contract is lapsed. Cross-train your staff. Everyone needs a vacation, and you'll be surprised how often someone in your corporation will win the lottery or be hit by a bus, so cross-train. Plan for catastrophic failure. If suddenly your main provider went away, what are your options? How could you do it? Where would you go? And once again, don't neglect the database basics. Do backups, do security, watch your schema changes. And with that, I think I made it in the right time. Cool. So do we have any questions, comments, or concerns?
You have time for questions.
Time for questions, yay.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, she has a question. Other than what the heck did I get into?
Certains ont des questions.
Well, if we don't have any questions, I'll be around for a while if you're too shy. Other than that, thank you all for coming out. And thank you two gentlemen.
Thank you, Dave.
These people and the other organizers are the ones you really have to thank because they make this look very, very easy. It's not. What they're doing is very hard. And hey, you guys have all this, hey, this is just it. A lot of work, and you don't appreciate it until you have to try to do it.
Merci, Dave. Thank you, Dave.